on this computer. Beautiful. Okay. So, thank you all for coming here tonight. My name is Matt Gallo. I am not Camille Kachechi. I am not the invasive species product coordinator for the Finger Lakes Prism. I am the terrestrial invasive species coordinator. I am Camille's direct supervisor. If you hadn't heard it before, Camille, who normally runs our trail survey, was out with our field team today, and her vehicle is currently stuck in a ditch, and she is waiting for AAA to come save her. So I have to step in today and run our trail survey training. You guys are in good hands. I've been running the trail survey until Camille picked it up this year for the last 4 years. So lots of experience with this program. If you haven't already, please download the Survey 123 app on your mobile device. You will need this to record invasive species observations with your smartphone. So without further ado, we will dive right in. So we are the Finger Lakes Prism, or the Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. We are part of the Finger Lakes Institute, which in and of itself is part of Hobart and William Smith College. Now, essentially, the Finger Lakes Prism is a partnership between that institute and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So in a nutshell, the DEC is paying for my time here tonight, and the Finger Lakes Institute is providing the HR and the office space and things like that. We work to stop invasive species, and that's in any way possible. So that's invasive species prevention, invasive species management, invasive species education and outreach, like what we're doing tonight. Anything that we can do to stop invasive species, we are involved in. We accomplish this work within the 17-county Finger Lakes region. So you could see that pictured on the map over here. Now, our offices are based out of Geneva, so the northern end of Seneca Lake, as you can see here, but we cover everything from Rochester to Syracuse down to Ithaca and Binghamton. Huge area with all the Finger Lakes. And so many of you are coming from really different parts of our region. Some of you are coming from the Rochester area, some of you are coming from the Syracuse area. So it's a really exciting program that's taking place at a region-wide scale. Now, when it comes to invasive species, there are many different examples of invasive species. And I think before we even get into invasive species identification, how to actually participate in this program, I just want to really quickly go over, make sure we're all on the same page, what an invasive species actually is. So we have 5 different examples pictured here of very notable invasive species. So up here in the top left, we have Burmese pythons. These guys are probably the most famous example of invasive species out there. Whenever I am telling people about my job and they have no idea what an invasive species is, I say, "Do you know about the pythons down in Florida?" And that's always the one that people get. Down here in the bottom left, all this crud that is covering this propeller, these are all zebra mussels. I'm sure we're all familiar with zebra mussels at this point. There are trillions of them throughout the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes. They are one of the worst aquatic invasive species out there. Over here in the bottom right, you guys are going to become more familiar with this guy later. This is spotted lanternfly. It's been a lot in the news lately. These guys love to feed on grapevines and apple trees and pose a huge risk to American agriculture. Over here in the top right, we have kudzu. This is known as the vine that ate the South. This, if you ever driven on a highway down in the Carolinas or Virginia or something like that, you've seen this plant, even if you don't immediately recognize it. You can see the impacts that it's having here. All of these trees, all this ground cover has been swallowed by it. And right here in the middle, we have a really noxious plant called giant hogweed that actually causes significant burning and scarring on human skin. So when we're talking about invasive species, I think first and foremost, what this slide is showing us is that we're looking at really different organisms, right? We're looking at a snake, we're looking at a couple plants here, we're looking at an insect, we're looking at some mussels. These very different organisms, yet they're all having really dramatic impacts on our environment. So what is it about these species that have in common with one another that make them so invasive? Well, really, an invasive species is any non-native species. So this is any organism that has been moved through one way or another by humans across an ocean, a continent, wherever, that causes harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. So it could be all 3 of these things. It could be one of these things. It could be a combination of these things. Either way, invasive species have to meet 2 criteria. They have to be something that is non-native to an ecosystem, so they didn't evolve where they are currently invading, and they are causing some kind of harm. So just because it's not native doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's really difficult to predict what makes a particular species invasive, but a lot of common characteristics that invasive species share with one another are things like having really high reproductive rates. They tend to be really aggressive. They often have no natural predators in their introduced ecosystems. They often are invading areas that have similar climates and latitudes to where they're originally from, and they're really good at taking advantage of human disturbance. And the way all of this happens, there's lots of different pathways that invasive species can travel on. Really, the one thing that they have in common, though, is that they're being moved by humans. And this could be either intentionally or unintentionally. So we have a couple really good examples here. You know, goldfish are originally from Asia. And I'm sorry, not from Asia, from Europe, excuse me. And when people release goldfish in ponds here in North America, they get this big. They can become an invasive species. And of course, Burmese pythons are a really great example. These were a very common pet down in Florida. And during Hurricane Andrew in the 90s, there was a pet store that was destroyed, and some Burmese pythons were able to escape, and now they have conquered southern Florida. So there's lots of different ways that these guys end up getting moved around. But it's really important to remember here, this concept in invasive species ecology we call the TENS rule. So this means that only 10% of non-native.
Okay.
Uh, I'm sorry, excuse me. Um, Sorry,
This is not good.
folks. I'm just gonna mute. Just make sure we're all muted here. Please make sure you're muted. Definitely helps me out quite a bit. Okay, we'll keep going forward here. So only 10% of non-native introductions survive, and only 10% of those survivors become invasive. So moving right along here, and to make matters worse, there's lots of different issues that are making invasive species more more problematic than they've been. Things like climate change are playing a really big role in the spread of invasive species. The costs of invasive species can often be quite profound, and we can generalize the spread of an invasive species with what we call the invasion curve here. So essentially, we're looking at how an invasive species spreads over time. And the problem is that many of the famous invasive species that we're familiar with, they infest an area that is so large, and the costs of controlling them are so high that we can't really get rid of them once they've been here long enough. So what we try to do with invasive species is stop them when their populations are still small enough that we can prevent them from getting here, or we can eradicate them. That's getting to invasive species essentially as soon as we can, because the longer and longer that they infest an area, the larger that area is going to increase, which means the cost of controlling them are also going to increase. Now, in terms of specific costs of invasive species, we have lots of different ones: environmental, economic, human health. We don't. This isn't school. You guys don't need to take notes here. We don't need to go through all of these in detail. All you need to know is that invasive species have really high costs. And last year, the UN came out with a conservative estimate. So this is like the low ball answer here. That invasive species cost the global economy at least $400 billion every year. And this number has actually quadrupled every decade since the 70s. So that means right now in the 20s, right, invasive species are costing us $400 billion every year. That means 10 years ago it was $100 billion every year. And that means 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about $1.2 trillion in costs every single year. So invasive species are having a huge global impact. Now, in terms of dealing with that global impact, that's where you guys come in, the trail survey. So this is a really great program that helps us get a sense of where invasive species are spreading so we can get to them before they really start to have economic, environmental, or human health consequences. So you guys are playing a really important role for us. We are very limited in terms of what species and how many people we have out there. So we really need help from you guys to be our boots and eyes on the ground to keep an eye out on where these invasive species are spreading. So in terms of taking part in the trail survey, there's 3 steps here: identifying, surveying, and then reporting those invasive species. Anyone with a smartphone or a tablet is allowed to participate, and you can participate anywhere you want. You guys are volunteers. You're doing us a favor. Wherever it's convenient for you to survey, that's fine. Whether it's a trail you like to hike, the park you like to walk your dog, even your backyard, those are all fine, because Thing is, invasive species tend to pop up in lots of different places. And specifically how, we're going to ask you guys to survey at least once in June, July, and August for 2 different species each month. So it's 6 species total, 2 per month, at least all once, hopefully twice in June, July, and August. The reason why we tend to focus on trails are because trails are frequently disturbed areas. There's lots of people walking by, there's bikes, people are clearing brush and debris, and these unique environmental conditions along the forest edge of a trail side actually are places where invasive species really tend to pop up. And so often just by taking hikes, you can find a lot of invasive species right along the trail side because those are where the conditions for invasive species are going to be the best for them. So we're not asking you, to like go miles and miles off trail. You don't have to bushwhack as part of this. Just hiking down a trail, you're going to find 99% of the invasive species that are out there. Now, in terms of what to do, like I want to go look for invasive species, I want to be a trail tracker, like how do I do it? So you're going to find the area of your choice. Most people survey along trails. So you're going to head to the trail and begin surveying for the 2 species you're looking for that month. You're going to report detections and non-detections for survey 1, 2, 3. So what we mean by that is that if you see one of the invasive species we're looking for, that's great, make a report. If you don't see an invasive species, we also want you to make note of that as well. It's really important for us to know not only where invasive species are, but where invasive species aren't, because that means that we can really focus our attention to those places where invasive species are. So if you are hiking down a trail, what we want you to do is essentially stop whenever you see one of the invasive species that we're asking you to look for and make a detection. Now, if you're hiking along and you're not seeing anything, take a non-detection point for every 5 minutes roughly that you're walking down the trail. Again, there's no need to go off trail, and we're only asking you to do 1 trail per month as a minimum, but you're more than welcome to do more than that if you like. Now, let's dive into the species that we're going to be learning how to identify here. So 6 different species, and we're just going to go, again, 2 per month. So we're going to have 2 species for June, 2 species for July, 2 species for August. And we're going to start here with Norway maple. It's a very common invasive species, and as the name implies, it's originally native to Europe. This is a maple tree, right? So we all know that classic maple leaf shape. This is a medium to large tree. Really the main way to identify Norway maple is you take the leaf, and at the stem of the leaf where it meets the twig, it's going to have a milky white sap that comes out. This is the main unique identifying characteristic when it comes to Norway maple. Also, unlike a lot of our native maple species, of which there are several, the bark of Norway maple is not shaggy in appearance. It's usually like a brown color, while all of our native maple species have a gray color bark. So this is a good visualization of that here. So here on the left, we have the native sugar maple. We can see that grayer bark. It's a little bit smoother. Here on the right, we can see another native species. This is red maple. Again, it's a lighter gray color. It's a bit smoother. And then here in the middle, we have our Norway maple. So we can see lots of these cracks in the bark, these ridges and furrows. It's a darker brown in coloration. So that's another way you can identify Norway maple. Do not go just based on the shape of the leaves. You can't really tell sugar and Norway maple apart just by the leaves. Go by the bark and especially that milky white sap at the leaf stem. Our other species for June is Mile a Minute. This is an emerging invasive species. This is a species that is an annual vine, grows very, very aggressively, and it can really form like carpets in areas. And in some cases, it's been shown to grow up to 6 inches per day, hence the name Mile a Minute. The main way to identify Mile a Minute is fairly easy. It will have these almost perfectly shaped triangular leaves. And there's lots of plants out there that have like leaves that kind of resemble a triangle, but Mile a Minute like perfectly resembles a like an equilateral triangle where like every edge is the same length. They're also going to have these more circular cup-shaped leaves, as we can see in this picture, kind of in the center left here. At the stem, nodes where the stems are going to be like branching out. And the stems themselves are also going to be covered in all of these little hooks leading up to those triangular shaped leaves. So lots of different shapes when it comes to Mile a Minute. It's going to have circular leaves at the nodes. At the very ends of the twigs, it's going to have triangular shaped leaves. And all along those stems, it's going to have little hooks on them. Later in the year, it's going to get blue fruit, but that's not really going to be on Mile a Minute when you guys are going to be looking for it. Moving forward here, for July, this is our established invasive species. We have swallowwort. So there's two species of swallowwort. They both look the same. You don't need to be able to tell the difference between the two. It's just going to be swallowwort. So these guys are originally native to Europe. This is an invasive vine. The main way you can identify swallowwort is that it's a small, low-growing vine that has these kind of brown, kind of ugly star-shaped leaves, 5 points on them. They're almost notable for not being very notable. They will have these long tapered leaves that are arranged in what's called an opposite leaf arrangement. So we could see this picture in the bottom left here, what exactly I mean by that. So an opposite leaf arrangement means that as you're going down the twig, every leaf is in a pair. So every leaf on the left is going to have a leaf directly opposite it on the right. Versus most other plants have what's called an alternate leaf arrangement, which means the leaves are by themselves and they will alternate their way down the twig. So you have one on the right, then one on the left, then one on the right, then one on the left, then one on the right, then one on the left. Versus swallowwort is going to be opposite leaf arrangement. So they're always going to be in pairs together. They're going to have those long pointed opposite leaves and those star-shaped flowers. Later on in the year, they're also going to get these kind of like greenish, long tapered seed pods as well. They kind of resemble a milkweed seed pod if you're familiar with those. Our emerging invasive species for July is beech leaf disease. Now, this is a really interesting invasive species. It infects beech trees, which are a native tree here in New York. They're one of our most common tree species. And essentially, this is a nematode, so essentially a microscopic worm that causes shading in the leaf tissue between the leaf veins. So this is the only disease that kind of does this, and you don't really need to know how to identify beech because beech is just so common. You're going to run into it out there if you're hiking along a trail. And there's no other diseases that cause this kind of shading in between the leaf veins. Please note that this coloration here is only going to be noticeable if you hold a leaf up to the light. So make sure that when you're looking at beech leaves, if you think you run into a leaf that might be infected with beech leaf disease, make sure that you're just take a leaf off a twig and just hold it up to the sun because there can be quite a dramatic difference between the symptoms if you're looking at it towards the ground. Now, there are other diseases that affect our beech trees. So here on the right, we have some other examples of diseases that do infect beeches, like beech bark disease that causes the bark to all kind of like crumble up. They usually have this nice white smooth bark. And we can see some other signs of disease here, like this browning of the leaf tissue. Sometimes you'll see yellowing of leaf tissue for beeches. I want to make it really clear here. This doesn't really cause any discoloration other than the shading. So don't look for dead brown leaves. Don't look for yellow leaves. It's just shading in between the leaf veins. Okay, moving along here, we have autumn olive. So this is our species, one of the two species that we're going to be looking for in August. This is originally native to Asia. This is a shrub, and autumn olive is really easy to identify because it has these kind of basic typical leaf shape, as we can see here in the top left, this photo. But they are covered in thousands of silver specks on the leaves, and you will probably see some of these as well, and on their bright red berries too. So the berries and the leaves are covered in thousands of tiny white specks. These can look similar to some other invasive shrub species we have, like either honeysuckle or privet, but autumn olive, unlike those species, has an alternate leaf arrangement, unlike honeysuckle and privet, which have an opposite leaf arrangement. But really, if you see a big bush and it has all these little speckles on it, you can be rest assured that it is autumn olive. And finally, our only animal that we're going to be, or well, I guess speech leaf disease is also an animal, but our main animal that we're going to be looking for is spotted lanternfly. This is an insect that can be found in all kinds of different habitat environments, and it can potentially cause some really severe impacts on our agriculture here in New York State. So when we're looking for spotted lanternfly, the time of year we're going to be looking for them, we have a diagram of their life cycle pictured here. They're going to be in either of these two forms that we see on the bottom left and the bottom right here. So the bottom left, it'll be this insect that doesn't have any wings. It'll be black and red with white spots going down its back. This is the fourth instar. This is essentially like a teenage spotted lanternfly. They will typically reach the stage in the mid to late summer. And beginning in late summer, they will move into their adult stage, as we can see here in the bottom right, where they will have pink wings with black spots. There are pretty much no other insects that resemble spotted lanternfly in any way. So rest assured, if you see any insects out there that look like either of these photos pictured here, that's going to be spotted lanternfly. You might see spotted lanternfly earlier. Sometimes they'll be as an egg mass. Sometimes they'll be as this little first instar nymph. Don't really worry about those. Just worry about these more notable examples that we can see pictured here. Adults, spotted lanternflies will usually reach about an inch in size, so maybe like half the length of your thumb. Okay. Now reporting with survey 123. So those are all our species identification. I know I kind of flew through that. We are going to be sharing all of these PowerPoint slides with you guys. And we also have a cheat sheet that you can take with you out into the field so that you can more confidently identify these species. This is our Trail Tracker program. So if you are a novice at identifying these invasive species and I kind of went through this all and you're like, Matt, I have no idea still how to identify those species. Don't worry at all. We're going to be sharing all this information with you. So you should be fine. So now we're just going to very quickly go through reporting with Survey 123. So if you haven't already, please download the Survey 123 app. If you have already downloaded, please open it now. So when you open up Survey 123, and if you all would just like to follow along with me here, you're going to be greeted with this screen that has like a city skyline, and it's going to have three options here. It's going to say sign in with ArcGIS Online, manage ArcGIS connections. You can ignore both of those options. Right here, right below it, there's going to be this option that says continue without signing in. Just hit that. Now, once you get into the app and hit continue without signing in, you will be greeted with a page that will probably be blank. You're going to need to get our survey form for the trail survey. So there should be this search bar at the top right over here. And there'll be this little button for a QR code. I actually realized I should probably not have that there. There'll be this QR code button here. Click that QR code button and then scan this big QR code I have here on the screen. This will open up our trail survey form, and it will add it to the list of surveys on your home screen. So you will be able to record data using Survey 123. So I'm just going to give people a quick second to do that. And while you guys do that, I'm going to answer some of these questions in the chat here. Berries are very yummy on autumn olive. I agree with you, Sarah. Give people a second. So you're just going to be hitting this QR code button at the top right of your screen, and then you're going to scan this big QR code we have pictured here. Okay. So once you've done that, we're going to keep moving on here. If you haven't been able to follow along so far, just hang around, and I can work with you one-on-one after the training here. But just for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep the show going here. So going forward, once you get that, you click on the survey and it will bring up a page that looks like this. So when you're going to be making an observation, just you would press the collect button down here. If you are recording an observation and you don't have any internet or cell service, the survey is going to be saved to your outbox after you collect it. Just make sure that you submit those later when you get home and you have internet access, because if they stick around in the outbox, they're not going to be submitted into our system. We're not going to be able to see the points that you're taking. And if you want to see anything you've submitted previously, you can always go to the send button, and that'll just show what you've done in the past. But for now, just follow along and hit that collect button, and we'll just walk through together how to take a practice point here. So once you collect that button, you're going to create a new observation for each point that you are recording. You're going to record all the species present at that point before moving to a new location, and you do not have to make a new point for each species. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment here. But when you're on this collect screen, you should be given all of this information here. It's going to have name. Do you have an IMAP Invasives account? Your participation level. You guys are going to be trail trackers. The date. It'll have a little map for your observation point, and some other questions as well. Now, when it comes to your survey location, Survey123, the app, is automatically going to be recording the location of your observation. You might get a warning about the accuracy of your location if you're in an area that maybe just has some bad cell service. In that case, just press the little crosshair here, and it will try to give you more accurate coordinates. If you can still submit your survey if this happens, like, don't worry about it too much. Just try to get it as accurate as you possibly can. So we're running through our survey screen here. So you're going to be entering in your name. If you have an IMAP Invasives account, you can enter in your information if you hit yes. You don't need to have an IMAP Invasives account to take part of this, so you can always hit no for that. You guys are always going to be hitting Trail Tracker for your participation level and your date. So, all right. So on the survey location, we just went through that. And in terms of how to actually report, this is the really important part of the survey process here. So again, we want you to make these observations whether or not you're seeing an invasive species. If you do see an invasive species, you're going to hit yes, and it's going to bring up this species list. And we're going to ask you that you record the invasive species presence, its population size, its distribution, take a photo of that species, and note any species not detected. Now, if you are observing multiple species, like let's say, you found both autumn olive and spotted lanternfly at a site, you can hit the little plus button here to add in another observation. So once you hit that plus button, it's going to say, species list. You're going to enter in your species detected, your population size, your distribution, and all of that stuff. And then to go and to add another invasive species after that, you're just going to hit that other plus button here at the bottom right. Now, here's an example of what it looks like if you found an invasive species, right? So for our species detected, it's going to say Norway maple. For population size, this is really just a guesstimate. It's as close as you can possibly guess, right? So like up to half an acre, greater than 10 acres or something like that, whatever option you think best fits. And in distribution, it's going to ask you if a plant is trace, maybe it's just a single plant on its own, sparse, a few scattered plants and clumps around, dense, which is quite a few plants taking up an area, and monoculture, which is like completely dominating an area. So again, in our example here, like let's say you found Norway maple, you would just hit that plus button, and then you can go through and add other invasive species that you found. And of course, we also have our photo here as well. And once you go through all of that and you note the invasive species that you found, just make sure you're going through and you're noting which invasive species are not present. And if you do make any mistakes when you're entering this information, you can always hit this trash can to discard any current species report, and if you need to ever start over again. And you can always hit this arrow to see any other invasive species reports that you've made if you need to go back and change anything. Okay, so you're going to have this big list. It's going to have lots of different invasive species. Most of these species are for our trail masters, so only worry about, the 6 that we talked about today. note any invasive species that weren't present. There also might be an option that will say which species weren't present for trail trackers. Both of this month's species were present. Or you can hit no for detecting invasive species, which species are not present. You can just enter them on their own there. And that's it. That is the whole survey process. It is pretty simple. Once you go through all this, just make sure you hit that check mark at the very bottom right, and it's going to submit that observation for you. Now, if you do have need any additional identification help, I would really recommend the Seek app from iNaturalist. This is an additional app that you don't really need to use, but it's essentially an app that will you can use your phone's camera. You could point it at something, any living thing, and it will try to identify that species for you. So I pointed at my ferret here and was able to correctly identify it as a European polecat. That's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, you need to go through any of this maybe a little bit more slowly, let me know. I'd be happy to help you out. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I am also going to stop